right. Hello, everybody. This is our first edition with chatting with city council candidates. We're very lucky to have on the show today Tim Hoffman. He's running for the at-large district here in the city of Denver, Colorado. He's a former prosecutor in the Denver District Attorney Office for the past 5 years and has been a huge bicycle advocate and big into transportation. How you doing this afternoon, Tim?
I'm doing well, Lauren. I appreciate you having me on. I'm still actually at the DA's office, so still am a prosecutor, at least for the next couple of months, but very, very excited to be chatting with you and chatting about all things transportation in Denver and the metro region.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for coming on. So my first question that I have today is a very broad one. What is the state of transit in Denver in your eyes? What's working well right now?
So transit in Denver right now is both a mix of some serious challenges, but then some real opportunities moving forward. When you look at some of the challenges that we're facing right now, there were over 80 deaths, traffic fatalities last year alone. We're at, I think, 53 this year already. That's putting us on pace to exceed the number from last year. So we signed the Vision Zero pledge a couple of years ago now, and we're heading in the wrong direction, unfortunately. So that's a real challenge, especially when you have these high injury networks throughout Denver, where a relatively small number of cross sections and streets cause a massive amount of the overall serious bodily injury crashes and fatalities here. So that's absolutely something that the city should be doing more about, and frankly can do more about. Anyone who moves around Denver, especially in a car, which is the vast majority of people now, knows that even after the pandemic and a lot of more people working remotely, you will at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday hit traffic in Denver. If that's I-25, Broadway, Federal, Colfax, all over the city, at what should be off-peak hours, we're now having congestion. We're still projected to have thousands of additional people moving here every year for the next decade. So there's no reason to believe that's going to get anything but worse unless we figure out other modes of moving more people around the city. So those are some of the challenges. Obviously, when you start talking about congestion, when you start talking about additional cars on the road, that has implications for climate change. It has implications for what it costs to do maintenance and upkeep of these roads. So it has all of these other knock-on effects. So those are some of the challenges that we are facing currently. There's also a lot of opportunity, though, and I think that there is reason to be hopeful that there are not only city leaders, but community leaders, community groups, and then just everyday citizens here in Denver who are excited about moving around the city in means that are more sustainable, more efficient, and better for everyone. You're obviously very familiar with the fact that in the past couple of months, there have been 2 rounds of this e-bike rebate program that the city put on. The first time, I think it was over 2,500 applications for that e-bike rebate program. In the second round, the website for it went live at about 8 a.m. and by about 8:30 it crashed because of massive interest in that type of program. So what that tells you is that in a city like Denver that has over 300 days of sunshine, has a younger population than a lot of other cities, has a more active population than a lot of other cities, there is a hunger out there from a lot of people to move around the city in means other than a single occupancy vehicle, other than just driving yourself around. And so providing things like interconnected, protected bike networks will enable people to do that in a way that benefits not only them, but drivers as well. Because right now, it's around 3 in 4 people are commuting in Denver every day by themselves in a car. That's above the national average for cities of our size, and is something that, again, is only going to get worse unless you provide these other ways of people moving around. So things like e-bikes, scooters, the light rail. Right now we're in early August, so we're in a period of 1 month where RTD, light rail, buses, everything else is free, which I think is a great way to showcase that. Though a lot of people don't use it, RTD can get you really where you need to go in this city or around this city. And so I'm hopeful that there's a more kind of sustainable energy built after this month of the free fares, and showcasing some of the options that RTD and the light rail can provide.
All right, perfect. So I kind of want to zoom in on what you spoke to in regards to a connected bike network. So what would you say is the biggest challenge to connecting the bike network in Denver? And then kind of, talking about your backyard, what in your immediate neighborhood could be improved in regards to the bike network?
Right. So for people who are familiar with it, the mayor's office and the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure have, over the last several years, put in dozens of additional lanes of bike lanes across the city, and they should be applauded for where some of those have taken place. Right. You now have on 13th Avenue, for example, a protected bike lane that can take you basically from the Golden Triangle out west, over to the west side of I-25. So those are the kind of examples of what we have been able to do that has worked. The problem and the ultimate question that I think anyone who's in this space should be thinking about and talking to city officials and potential elected officials about is whether or not someone can move north to south across the city or east to west across the city on a protected, comfortable, integrated and interconnected bike lane network. And that's where you are having the gaps, and that's where the missing pieces are. There are parts of that feel great right now. There's a couple of lanes on South Broadway where there's a great protected bike lane, but then it abruptly ends, dumping you out either onto Broadway, or then you have to navigate your way around several blocks without any sort of bike infrastructure to find the next available protected bike lane. And so that's not only frustrating for cyclists like you and I, but if you're in a car, that's also frustrating, right? Because it doesn't make, from the perspective of most people, as much sense when it seems to be this hodgepodge of there's a bike lane for a couple of blocks and then ends, and then you go over a couple of blocks and down a few more blocks to find the next connected bike lane. It's confusing for the people who are trying to navigate it, either on a scooter or in a wheelchair or on a bike, but also if you're driving in a car, it's also confusing. So it doesn't benefit anybody. So the focus, I think, needs to be, and if I were elected to the Denver City Council, something that I would really push the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure on is, if I want to kind of move in those cardinal directions, understanding that not every street is going to have a bike lane. And the last thing I want as an advocate for multimodal transportation is more bike lanes for the sake of having more bike lanes, right? You have to be strategic about where you put them. And I think in some cases, you will actually have fewer bike lanes if you are more thoughtful about where they go and how they move people around. So that, as a kind of general picture, I think is the question. It has to be interconnected and it has to be protected. From where I sit in kind of south central Denver, I live pretty near Florida Avenue. I also live pretty near Steel Street. Steel Street really can take you almost from Yale all the way down to the Cherry Creek Trail, without much interruption. That's an example of a street where there are sharrows right now, but as you and I know, if you're on one of those streets with sharrows, many drivers don't even know what those are. And when someone's close passing you at 40 miles an hour, that can be a very, very scary situation. So I think that that's a perfect example of the type of area where if you had that type of interconnected bike lane that then would dump people out onto that Cherry Creek Trail, which I think for anyone who has the ability or the opportunity to ride on it would agree, it's a pretty nice way of moving in and around the city. The problem for most people is how do you get to that type of trail? So that's one of the things that I definitely like to see. And then independent of protected bike lanes, right, there's other just traffic calming measures that we can take on that make the streets safer for pedestrians, for cyclists, for people on scooters, for people in cars, for the neighborhoods themselves. So I, 2.5 years ago now, was hit actually on Florida Avenue while I was biking home about 4 blocks from my house by a pickup truck and had a pretty bad brain injury. And at least part of that has to do with the design of Florida Avenue in my neighborhood, which it's just a complete straightaway without any stop signs for probably 7 or 8 blocks, which means that the cars that are going down Florida Avenue go at excessive speeds. And so the cars that are at those cross streets trying to get across Florida feel the need to accelerate at a very rapid pace. And that's how my accident happened, is one of those that's how my crash happened, excuse me. One of my at one of those cross streets, the pickup truck was at the stop sign, and because you have to move across that street very quickly, accelerated into me. You and I both know, and you talk to anyone in this space, there's this recognition that people are going to make mistakes. That is human nature. There are street designs that can be implemented that will lessen the impact of people in cars that are making mistakes to injure themselves or other people. And that's not just in my neighborhood, that's across the city, especially in those high injury networks that I mentioned earlier, that I think absolutely should also be a focus.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that answer. And I really wanted to kind of touch on one thing you said in regards to multimodal transit. And I'm just curious about, how often do you generally ride transit, everything from RTD to the free mall ride? And from a ridership perspective, or even from a perspective of someone that doesn't ride transit, what could be improved to encourage more people to ride it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I use some form of mass transit. I'd say at least 2 to 3 times a week. Most days I bike down from where I live down to my office, which is downtown. That's either via e-bike or just a normal pedal bike. But if there's inclement weather, or if I have events after work or whatever it is, I will go over to the DU light rail station. I'll take the DU light rail down. I'll sometimes go over and take, I think it's 24, which goes down to University. That links up with the 15 off of Colfax, and then that takes me basically directly downtown. So I'm someone who, and then when I'm downtown, I use the free mall ride a fair bit just to get up and down that corridor. So I'm someone who uses light rail, buses, and the free mall ride daily, if not weekly. Things that could be improved, and I think that this is in some of the plans and hopes that RTD has talked about. And I think we're probably going to get into some of their new proposal coming up here in a little bit, but you have to have frequency, you have to have comfort, and you have to have ability to access. So frequency means that on some of these high transit areas, Colfax, Broadway, Federal, things like that, especially at peak times, you want to have buses that are coming every 5 or 10 minutes. The problem is, if you are someone who needs to be at a job at a certain time, and a bus is coming every half hour, every 40 minutes, and it's not a consistent schedule, and you miss that bus by even a couple of minutes, if the next bus isn't coming for half an hour or 40 minutes, that's a real problem for you and can have real adverse ramifications at your job. And so it takes that bus being late or being too early or not coming at all once before a lot of these people who otherwise would want to take a bus, take some sort of rapid transit, take a light rail. It takes that one time where it's not as consistent or efficient as it needs to be for that person to throw up their hands and say, that's it. I'm taking my car or I'm taking an Uber because that's at least going to get me where I need to be with a kind of a time certain. So you have to make sure that there's more frequency there. You have to make sure that it's more comfortable, both in terms of where it is that you're waiting for a bus. I think it's something like less than 25%, or maybe it's right at 25% of the most used bus stops in Denver are at all sheltered or covered, right? So Denver weather, as we saw last night with some of the torrential rain, that weather can come out of nowhere. And if you're just basically standing in a field without any sort of protection, not even a bench, nothing like that, that doesn't feel like a very welcoming environment for someone who's at least curious about using that type of system. Kind of part and parcel to that, there was an article in the Washington Post a couple of months ago now, a month or two ago now, about the 15 on East Colfax, the 15 bus, and some of the harassment and safety concerns that those not only the passengers but the bus drivers feel. You have to make sure that people who are not only riding these buses but who are operating these buses feel safe while they're either doing their jobs or trying to get from point A to point B. And then the last thing is accessibility, and that's, you know, we've talked about before, the last mile problem, right? And what you're going to do if how you're going to create an environment where someone is willing to walk or ride something from their house to either a bus stop or a light rail station, right? That's you know, you kind of have to level down to what the basics are. And the basics in a lot of cases are, can I walk on a sidewalk to get from my house to a bus stop? And unfortunately, for far too many people in the city, you can't do that. And so if you can't even walk on a sidewalk, if you're getting dumped out onto a street for some period of time, moving from point A to point B, that's going to dissuade you from wanting to use that public transit. So it's got to be consistent, it's got to be safe, and it's got to feel welcoming for the people, especially those, as you were talking about, right, who are curious about it and who think, hey, I'm tired of paying 15, 20 bucks a day for parking downtown. Or I'm tired of paying $250 a month for a parking spot somewhere, or I'm tired of you know, sitting in this traffic in my car every day. And so there are people out there who are curious about using these other modes of transit, and so you have to make sure that you're checking all of those boxes so that when they give mass transit a shot, or give that multimodal option a shot, they come back for a second day. And I'll just kind of end by reiterating the point that I've made earlier. I've kind of made as I talk to more and more people throughout this campaign. Everyone, you know, there are not oftentimes at this point in politics and public policy win-win scenarios. When you start talking about multimodal transit, mass transit, public transit, it really is one of those situations where it benefits the people who are using that mode of transit, and it also absolutely benefits the people who aren't. So the people who are driving cars, the people who are using these other modes. It really has the ability to benefit everyone in the community, everyone in the city.
Absolutely. And I mean, the connection between sidewalks is gigantic. At the rate that we're going, you know, obviously, give or take the Denver Deserves Sidewalk initiative, it may take anywhere from 400 to 9 years. Sure. Let's hope it's closer to the 9-year point. Yeah. I want to zoom in very quickly on Colfax Avenue. I imagine you probably have kept up with the bus rapid transit plan that they've been kind of discussing along Colfax. What are your thoughts in regards to that, particularly when the bus crosses over from Denver to Aurora and there's no longer a dedicated lane?
Yeah, so obviously for the seat I'm running for, which is Denver City Council, your authority ends at the city and county line. And this is, I think, the East Colfax Bus Rapid Transit, which now I think it's officially called Lynx now, right? That to me is a great model of when you have the partnership between local government, like the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure and the regional, the RTD, you can marry those two to create this type of program where you're taking away, I think cumulatively, it's like 300 parking spots along East Colfax, which is, that's along a pretty large section of Colfax, which, understanding that parking spots are at a premium right now, the hope and the belief for the people who pushed for this project, and I think are supporters of it, and I count myself as one of them, is that the potential for those dedicated bus lanes, and what it will do for moving people up and down East Colfax into downtown Denver and then out into Aurora or wherever people get off in between, that the benefit for people, residents who live there, the businesses who live there, the people who commute along that corridor, those benefits will far outstrip any sort of problems with lack of parking spaces, or I think that they're taking essentially 2 lanes away, one from either side of Colfax traffic, to put in the dedicated bus lanes. And so that's, like I was just talking about earlier, the hope and the belief, and this has been shown to work in other cities and places where these dedicated bike lane, or I keep on going back to bike lanes, where these dedicated bus lanes are implemented, is that it has the net effect of reducing congestion for cars as much as it does for anything else. Because, as I said, when you make it more frequent, which is what they're talking about on the East Colfax corridor, having those buses at peak times, but really kind of throughout the day, 7 days a week, coming every 5 to 10 minutes. So if you have that kind of frequency, if you have the comfort of being on those buses, and if you have the ability to get to where you need to go, which Colfax is one of these main arteries that connects different parts of our community, if you have those things, the calculus for most people, I believe, and I think the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure and RTD studied this for years. A lot of people have said, I would love to use that type of mass transit system, but it has to check these boxes off. And certainly if it's coming every 5 to 10 minutes, it's going to move so much faster than the traffic that is on either side of it. That's going to be the type of thing that you're going to start to see buses get full. And that's benefiting everybody in that community.
Kind of segueing that to my next question, in regards to RTD, it's currently undergoing is colloquially called as a system optimization plan, where there will be an increase in bus frequency along major routes such as Colfax and increase of light rail. But the trade-off is a lot of low-performing lines will be cut, some entirely. Some will be essentially supplemented by dial-a-ride, which is a lot less frequent service. How do you feel in regards to RTD's system optimization plan?
Yeah,
in this context?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think obviously, as someone who lives in Denver and is hoping to be an elected official representing Denver, Denver is frankly going to be the main beneficiary of a lot of what they're talking about. There's going to be somewhat of a shift away from some of the outlying routes in the more suburban areas of the metro region, to focus on as you said, the more highly trafficked and high frequency corridors, which largely focuses certainly around Denver, but then, it's also about increasing routes, making sure people can get from Denver to Boulder, that type of thing. I am generally in support of this type of reevaluation and putting resources where they are most needed. Obviously, COVID was a huge hit to public transit, not just in Denver, not just in the metro region, but nationwide, right? RTD, I think, has bounced back. I think some numbers put it at 85% of pre-pandemic levels of ridership, which, all things considered, is a pretty good bounce back. But they're also dealing with some very, very real budget constraints, right? As is really any municipal or regional government agency. And so I think for most people, the last thing that they want to see is an empty bus just on a loop, not being used, because that's obviously an inefficient use of resources. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for the community where that bus could be. And so I think doing these kind of, relatively regular reassessments, and it's a massive undertaking when you're looking at something as large as RTD, but to take that type of undertaking, do that reassessment, see this is where we are not, and I think that frankly, people who have problem with government writ large should celebrate this type of initiative where it's really looking at where are we getting the most bang for our buck. Let's put more resources into those locations, and then pull back from the other places. That doesn't make everybody happy, right? There's not going to be only winners in this situation. But when you are dealing with scarce resources, when you're dealing with the bounce back from a pandemic, when you're dealing with the ongoing effects of climate change, right? You have to be strategic about where you are putting your limited resources. And that this type of program, I think, is accomplishing those things.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to an extent, and it's kind of important to, especially because RTD hasn't had as substantive as a change in this in the past, I want to say 40 to 50 years. So, continual reevaluation, especially when it comes to certain lines in certain areas of the city, is important. So, all right, the final question I have for you today, and this could be kind of a fun question depending on where you'd want to go, but
Yeah.
if you had one bus or train that could take anywhere within RTD system, can be Denver, can be anywhere along the kind of districts that RTD lies, where would you go?
Oh man, that is a good question. So after that crash that I had 2.5 years ago, for about 6 months, I was really having to learn how to walk and talk again. So there was some pretty dark moments during that period of time. And the thing that brought me back was at first doing laps walking around my couch. And then a couple of weeks later, it was, walking not to the end of the block because I would have gotten lost, but walking a couple hundred steps down my block. And I kind of started layering on top of that. And I'd always been someone who had enjoyed running and hiking to some degree, but I really, the thing that brought me back, more than almost anything else from that crash, was trail running, and just kind of being in the foothills. And so if I could get from basically my house in the DU area, call it, up to Golden, or to some of those hiking trails and running trails, with a light rail, or a bus that was an express, so it was 1 or 2 stops, that selfishly would be what I would pick. But as a general matter, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, I really think that the more people can look at where RTD can take you, where some of our local transportation can get you to, you'll see that you really can get from point A to point B, in the metro area, somewhat effectively, right? The thing we need to address is, number one, that last mile problem. how do we get you into the public transit system in the first place? And number two, the frequency. And especially if you're trying to go, say, from South Denver up, up into Thornton or something like that, and you're going to have to make one or two connections. If you miss that connection by a minute and then you're sitting and waiting for an hour, that's a real problem. So I guess for me, selfishly, if I could get up into the foothills very quickly, I'd love that. But I think as a general public policy matter, we can get where we need to go. It's now a matter of how do we get there faster, more frequently, and more safely.
Perfect. Yeah. For me, I mean, yeah, from the selfish standpoint, if there could be a shuttle bus from the end of the W line to Red Rocks, that'd be absolutely perfect. Even if I had to pay $10, versus paying 50, however much an Uber costs nowadays, or having to go on a bus near Chiba Hut or something like that. So,
right. Well, and I also think and I don't know if this is supplementing my answer or if it's just kind of adding to it, but I think that we need to be more strategic and more thoughtful about using mass transit around events. It never ceases to amaze me that when a big concert at Red Rocks lets out, there's not just a line of RTD buses waiting to take people back to whatever it is, Central Business District, or the end of W line, whatever it is. Same thing goes for some of the major sporting events or big concerts at the Ball Arena or whatever it is. I understand that, like everything else, there are additional costs to those type of programs, and I think right now with RTD facing somewhat of a staffing problem, that absolutely kind of creates additional obstacles. But I guess in addition to the answers I already gave, I would love to see, and we have the technology now to track this, right? Uber and Lyft and all of these other companies have surge pricing, and they track kind of where the need is in real time, and they can flood a certain area with Ubers or Lyfts depending on the need. Those are the kind of opportunities that I think public transit can take and use to be more effective and efficient. And I think kind of building it at least initially around large public gatherings would be a good start.
absolutely. So if anyone wants to learn more about your campaign or wants to get involved, what's the best way for them to reach out and, kind of get involved at this point?
Yeah, thanks. So timfordenver.com is where you can find out more about the campaign, more about my positions. You can also contact me via usually the website, although we had some problems initially getting that set up. But now, I think that's how we kind of got connected initially. If you submit something via the website, we're now able to actually see that. So timfordenver.com, you can reach out and contact me. But yeah, I'm really excited about this campaign. I love chatting with people like you who have been in this space for a long time and are thoughtful about it. And it's an exciting time. As I said, I think right now, coming out of this pandemic and some of the challenges we're facing, it can seem daunting. But when you look at some of the opportunities that we have as a city, as a growing city, and as a city that's attracting people from across the state, across the country, across the world to move here, there's this really great opportunity to build a truly multimodal transportation system that gets people from point A to point B safely.